very first exposure I had to networks was a network using a bus topology. A bus topology is the way that Ethernet networks were commonly interconnected back in the 80s and the 90s. It sort of worked like this. We would have a long coaxial cable, and there were different types of coaxial cable. It's not like the 75 ohm coax cable you use for your home television. No, this was a 50 ohm cable. There was a thinner version called ThinNet and a thicker version called ThickNet. The ThickNet was also known as 10 base 5, and the ThinNet was known as 10 base 2. And the way we draw it architecturally, we draw it like this. We have our big coaxial cable that's weaving through the different office spaces, and then we literally have this little small jumper cable that's going to go from the device, and it's going to tap into this bus. We just tap into the cable going by locally. The way we would do this with ThinNet, the thinner of the coaxial cabling options, is we would use a little T connector like this. You see that we could come into one side of the T connector and come out the other side. That would be the bus. And the station, like this file server that wants to connect in to the network, it would have a little cable that will plug into this part of the T connector. That's the way that we would add on a station to the bus. One of the challenges, though, with a bus topology is, unlike a ring, unlike token ring, we have all these devices wanting to gain access to the network at any given time, but they don't take turns like the token ring clients took turns. Remember, with token ring, we went from station to station to station to station. Everybody had their turn, but now it's more of a free-for-all, because if this laptop wants to communicate to the network, it listens for a brief period of time. It listens to see, is there any traffic on the network right now? And if there's not, it will transmit on the network. It thinks, all right, the coast is clear, let's transmit on the network. And if another station is listening at exactly the same time, if these two stations hear the same period of silence, they could independently conclude that the coast is clear, it's clear to transmit, and they would both send a packet out on the network at the same time. When that happens, that's not allowed, by the way, when that happens, these two packets on the network, they would collide. That's called a collision. Both packets are corrupted at that point, and there's an indication, the PC, the laptop, it knows that a collision did occur, and it knows that it has to retransmit. Now, what's going to happen is each of these devices that transmitted and they detected that a collision occurred, they're going to set a random timer. And this random timer says, after this amount of random time, I'm going to try again. The thought is the randomness in the timer between these two devices, that's going to make these two devices come up with a different random time that they're going to wait. They're going to wait for a different back-off time, as it's called. And after this one waits, let's say, 10 milliseconds, and this one waits 20 milliseconds, they're going to try to transmit again. Hopefully this time, there's not going to be a collision that occurs. The technology that I've just described here, here's an acronym for you, is CSMA/CD. That stands for Carrier Sense Multiple Access with Collision Detection. Carrier sense, we're able to sense that we have a connection to the media, we have multiple stations that can access the media at any time, and if a collision occurs, we're able to detect that collision. To sum up the bus topology, we're probably not going to be using it in today's modern networks. This was the way that early implementations of Ethernet worked. The speed was almost always 10 megabits per second. The distance limitation varied a little bit. It was about 185 meters for ThinNet. It was about 500 meters for ThickNet. And the devices tapped on to the coaxial cable that was weaving throughout the office space on a floor of a building.